And so page 102, lesson 28. There's a little bit there at the very top in italics on page 102, and it reads like this. Though all the kings of Israel and most of the kings of Judah were wicked men who disobeyed the Lord, there were still some godly kings in the southern kingdom. King Hezekiah and King Josiah both worked to restore worship of the true God at times when most of the people had fallen away. So we are going to be in the book of Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles chapter 29 and chapter 30. We got some Bibles here. The table is just large enough that nobody can actually reach the Bibles. So you might need to use the table of contents at the beginning. Otherwise, you're thinking Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Looks like everybody's nearly got it. Page 643. Last time I tried to read a number, I was wrong. Kind of like when you're reading the commandments and you're like, oh yeah, I do this all the time, and I skipped a part.
Well, or you memorize it with other words in it. You want to put them in there because that's how you memorize it.
Yeah.
When you were younger.
Did you have the blue cap, the little blue one? I've got a copy of that one too.
Think back a little.
That's fair enough. All right, so we're in Second Chronicles chapter 29. We'll read chapter 29 and 30. So if you can follow along, I'll read for a while. So we're hearing about, first of all, good King Hezekiah. And then the other one we'll hear about is good King Josiah. And this is toward the end of the time of the kingdom of Judah. Shortly after this, the kingdom of Judah will be taken into captivity. So Second Chronicles 29 reads like this. Hezekiah became king when he was 25 years old, and he ruled as king in Jerusalem for 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, like everything that his father David had done. In the first month of the first year, and repaired them. He brought the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the eastern square. He said to them, listen to me, you Levites, consecrate yourselves now, and consecrate the house of the Lord, the God of your fathers. Remove the filth from this holy place, for our fathers have been unfaithful. They have done evil in the eyes of the Lord our God. They have forsaken him. They have turned their faces away from the dwelling of the Lord. They have turned their backs. They have also shut the doors of the porch of the temple and have extinguished the lamps. They have not burned incense or offered burnt offerings in the holy place to the God of Israel. Picking up in verse 8. So the wrath of the Lord is on Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them into an object of terror, horror, and hissing, as you see with your own eyes. Look, our fathers have fallen by the sword, and our sons, our daughters, and our wives are in captivity because of this. Now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger will turn away from us. Now you, my sons, do not be negligent, for you are the ones the Lord has chosen to stand in his presence, to minister to him, to serve him, and to burn incense to him. These are the Levites who responded. From the descendants of the Kohathites, Mahath, son of Amasai, and Joel, son of Azariah. From the descendants of Merari, Kish, son of Abdi, and Azariah, son of Jehalalel. From the Gershonites, Joah, son of Zimmah, and Eden, son of Joah. From the descendants of Elizaphan, Shimri, and Jael. I have to pronounce all three of those vowels. From the descendants of Asaph, Zechariah, and Mattaniah. From the descendants of Heman, Shehiel, and Shimei. And from the descendants of Jeduthun, Shemaiah, and Uziel. They gathered their brother Levites, consecrated themselves, and went to cleanse the house of the Lord, as the king commanded by the words of the Lord. So these are the guys who are chosen to clean out the temple from all the idolatry that had been happening there. Okay, that's basically what we're talking about here. Verse 16, the priests entered the inner part of the Lord's house to cleanse it. They brought every unclean thing that they found in the Lord's temple out into the courtyard of the house of the Lord. The Levites took it and carried it out to the Kidron Valley. On the first day of the first month, they began to consecrate the temple. By the 8th day of the month, they had gotten as far as the porch of the Lord. They continued to purify the house of the Lord for 8 more days. On the 16th day of the first month, they completed the work. They went into King Hezekiah and said, "We have cleansed the entire house of the Lord, the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and the table for the presentation of bread and all its utensils. We have prepared and consecrated all the utensils which King Ahaz discarded during his reign when he was unfaithful. Look, they are right there in front of the altar of the Lord." King Hezekiah got up early. He gathered the officials of the city and went up to the house of the Lord. Verse 21. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 lambs, and 7 male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary, and for Judah. He commanded the sons of Aaron, the priests, to offer them on the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the cattle. The priests collected the blood and splashed it against the altar. They killed the rams and splashed the blood against the altar. They killed the lambs and splashed the blood against the altar. Then they brought the male goats for the sin offering to the king and the assembly, and they laid their hands on them. The priests slaughtered them and made a sin offering with their blood on the altar to make atonement for all of Israel, because the king had commanded a burnt offering and a sin offering for all Israel. He stationed the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, harps, and lyres, according to the command of David, of Gad the king's seer, and of Nathan the prophet, because a command that comes through the hand of his prophets is a command from the hand of the Lord. The Levites stood with the musical instruments prescribed by David, and the priests stood with the trumpets. Hezekiah commanded that the burnt offering be offered on the altar. At the time that the burnt offering began, the song to the Lord and the trumpets also began. While the instruments prescribed by David, king of Israel, were playing, the whole assembly bowed down and worshipped. The singers sang, the trumpeters sounded the trumpets. All this continued until the burnt offering was complete. Those present with him bowed down and worshipped. King Hezekiah and his officials commanded the Levites to sing praises to the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. They sang glad praises and bowed down and worshipped. So verse 30, they're basically, working their way through the book of Psalms and singing the songs that they have there. Verse 31, Hezekiah responded, "Now you have taken up your duty to the Lord. Approach and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the house of the Lord." The assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings. The number of burnt offerings which the assembly brought was 70 cattle, 100 rams, and 200 lambs. All these served as a burnt offering to the Lord. The consecrated offerings consisted of 600 cattle and 3,000 sheep. Wow. Verse 34, but the priests were too few to be able to skin all the burnt offerings. So the brothers, the Levites, helped them until the work was completed, until more priests had consecrated themselves, because the Levites were more upright in heart in consecrating themselves than the priests. In addition to the great number of burnt offerings, they presented both the fat of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings that accompanied the burnt offerings. So the service of the house of the Lord was restored. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced because God had restored this for the people, and all this had been done very quickly. And there's a Passover celebration. We'll pause there. We'll read chapter 30 in just a few minutes. Okay. Any questions? Actually, we're gonna double check here. Yes.
Did they eat the animals?
Yes.
That's right. So they used all that.
Yes, for some of the offerings, they ate the animals. Some of the offerings, they actually did not. They burned it up completely. So this one will be fairly quick. Looking at verses 31 through 36. So this whole event is them rededicating the temple after it's filled with all sorts of garbage, refuse. It was broken down. Maybe there was idol worship that had been happening there. And it took those, that group of like 10 guys to about 2 weeks to clean it out. Yeah, it must have been pretty impactful. So yeah, because the temple building, and then they had extra buildings on the side of that, and then a courtyard around it. So it's like if it took 10 people like 2 weeks, all sorts of anything. All right, so looking at verses 31 through 36, what is most striking about this rededication event? Give you a minute or two. Yeah. Interpret that as you wish. Most striking, most noteworthy, most shocking. Some synonyms. Some synonyms. Is most striking in these verses about the rededication event. All right, looking at verses 31 through 36 in particular, is there anything that jumps out as striking, noteworthy, exciting, surprising? Yes.
That a lot of offerings and that there were chief priests and Levites had to help.
Yeah. All right. So there's all these offerings, and they're supposed to skin it first before they offer it as an offering. And they're like, we don't have enough people, and there's all these animals that are waiting. we need some Levites to help. All right. What else? Anything else that jumped out? I think Mrs. Brubaker had one talking about like all these animals.
Yeah, just the number of them. 700 cattle, 3,000 sheep.
Yeah, a flock of 3,000 sheep. Like there isn't enough space up on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, right.
And 700 cattle on top of that. And so these offerings, there's the whole burnt offering, which is what they start with, and that's when the whole animal is burned up entirely as a sacrificial offering to God. Then the other one that we heard about here is what they call a sin offering, which is where the king and the people put their hand on top of the animal's head. And that kind of symbolizes the transfer of guilt from this person to this animal. And then the animal is slaughtered, and then they burn the animal up as well. And there's actually like three other sacrifices. The one that is probably most common after that is a fellowship offering. We would say, barbecue, where you bring another animal and pig roast, except not a pig.
Right.
Yeah, actually, we might hear about that shortly. And a pig roast, those are fantastic, by the way. And that's where they kill the animal, and then they grill it, and then you sit down with the priest or the Levite or whoever, and then you eat with them, and that symbolizes that like fellowship has been restored between us and God. And so you think of this, you are coming to the temple, you've heard about this project that King Hezekiah has been doing, and okay, we've got 700 cattle, 3,000 sheep. They make a lot of noise, they make a lot of smell, and then you start burning them all. Like, there's a whole lot of visual things that you're hearing, things that you're smelling, things that you're seeing. When you put your hand on top of this animal's head, you'll feel the roughness of the animal's fur or hair, or whatever it is. And then you see all the sights and the smells, and you hear it all again. And it's a very vivid demonstration of God's sacrifice for sin.
So he knows he presented both the fat of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings that accompany the burnt offerings. What does that mean?
Yeah, and so the fellowship offering, the fat could be either burned up and offered to God, or it could be reserved for use in the fellowship offering to make sure the meat stays tender. The drink offering was one of those, like an add-on offering where you'd pour out the drink offering to God, or leave it there, or for use at the temple. And so when he's saying that they have enough animals that they're both sacrificing for the whole burnt offering, the sin offering, and the fellowship offering, and they've got all these things that are all of a sudden happening for the first time in 100 years. All right, in your workbook, page 102. I'm happy to report that we have multiple colors of pen this week. I think last week was the first time all year when everybody just had like one writing utensil.
And you had to make note of it.
Yeah. Put it on my calendar. All right, number 1, looking at chapter 29, verse 2. What do we learn about Hezekiah right away in 29, verse 2, which shows that he was different than almost every other king Israel or Judah had? Kaylin. Excellent. Yeah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And so he comes from this long family line where his father, his uncle, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, probably even his great-great-grandfather had led the nation of Judah to worship false gods. And Hezekiah said, you know what? That's not right. And he chose to do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Then maybe that's up there. There it is. For number 2, we have to look back at chapter 28. So if you're in chapter 29, Chronicles 28, verse 19. So I don't have to even turn a page, it looks like. Reads like this, verses 19 through 25 of Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 28. And it reads like this. The Lord brought Judah low because Ahaz, king of Israel, had led Judah to throw off all restraint. He had been very unfaithful to the Lord. When Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came, he marched against Ahaz and oppressed him instead of strengthening him. Ahaz took some things from the house of the Lord, from the palace of the king, and from the officials, and he gave them to the king of Syria, but it did not help him. And so Ahaz is trying to buy him off. Like, here comes Tiglath-Pileser from Assyria, and Ahaz is like, maybe if I just write him a big fat check, give him a bunch of money of some sort, then he'll be good to us. But it didn't work. Verse 22, in the time of his distress, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. That was the way he was. He sacrificed the gods of Damascus that had defeated him. He said, because the gods of the king of Aram helped them, I will sacrifice to them so that they may help me. But they were his ruin and the ruin of all Israel. Ahaz gathered the articles from the house of God and cut all these things from the house of God to pieces. He shut the doors of the house of the Lord and made altars for himself in every corner of Jerusalem. In each and every city throughout Judah, he made high places to burn incense to other gods. He provoked the Lord, the God of his fathers, to anger. So number 2, looking at what we just read from 2 Chronicles 28, what had King Ahaz done that made it necessary to cleanse the temple like this? Keita.
He was eating on the side of the Lord.
Excellent. Yeah. He closed the temple. He gave away its utensils, which is, all the shovels and forks and everything for offering sacrifices, fireplace tongs, and the poker stick, even the marshmallow sticks. And he gave away all of its stuff, and he set up altars to false gods. And so that was where he closed the doors to the temple, like, we're not even using this building anymore. And this is still the Temple of Solomon. Like, the whole thing is covered in pure gold, or at least it was at one time. And then at every intersection in the city, instead of a stoplight or a stop sign, you had an altar to some god or another god. Yikes. All right, so number 3, this is back in chapter 29. It's not very often we get into 2 Chronicles 5. What did Hezekiah direct the Levites to do? Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. To get themselves and the temple ready for service to God. So that is consecrating themselves, which is, obviously getting cleaned up, and then they would have a ritual bath, and then they would have a clean set of like linen clothing to wear. And then they were supposed to, once they had made themselves clean, then they were supposed to go and make the temple clean. We're talking about not just like mopping the floor and getting all the junk out, but also making it ceremonially clean, meaning wherever they had sacrificed to false gods, then they basically have a new sacrifice to the true God. All right, number 4. All right, so number 4, looking at chapter 29, verse 17. How long did the cleaning and restoration work take? Caleb. 16 days. It is 2 weeks and 2 days.
Are you thinking about what you could get? To
All right, number 5. That one was easy. How about this one? Looking especially at verses 20 through 24, same chapter, chapter 29. Once the temple was ready, what was the first thing they did? Chapter 29, verses 20 through 24. Keita.
The king got up and
Yeah. So they offered sacrifices. The king got up nice and early. He said, it's going to be a long day of slaughtering animals today, and offering them as sacrifices to God. And he was joyful about it because, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my god. It's funny when the kids like, you know, they ask me, "What do you want?" I'm like,
They sell it at the Perrysburg Costco. Not all the time, but like you could get a whole like side of lamb. It's halal, which is another word for kosher, but people don't like it when you say that. It's a different kind of kosher entirely. We'll save that discussion for another time. Looking at Second Chronicles 29 verses 32, 33, and 34. I think Kate to mention this earlier. What problem did they run into as the temple worship was being restored? All right. There's all these sacrifices coming in, and the line of people, you know, with their sheep or their goat or their cattle, their oxen, is stretching out the door, down the steps, up and around the city, and out the city gate. You're like, this is going to be all day for the next 5 days. And so that's actually a good problem to have. And this is kind of the question behind this question. What does this tell you about the people of Israel or the people of the kingdom of Judah at this time? People living, yeah, they are willing to be led to follow the one true God, that they fear the true God, and they see that King Ahaz hadn't done much of anything to actually help them. Number 7 is a review from lesson number 13. We might be able to answer it without turning back. Rack your brains. Okay, what was the Passover about? Had something to do with Gretchen. Excellent. All right. So the event was the Lord would pass over the house and not kill your firstborn. Do you remember where this happened? Okay. In Egypt. And this was actually a plague. Do we remember which of the plagues this was? Which of the 10 plagues this was? Flip a coin. Yeah. Number 10. So that was the last of the 10 plagues. They're in slavery in Egypt, and they put the blood of a perfect lamb on their doorpost. You remember that part? And then the angel of death would pass over and not kill anybody in their household. And then God said, I want you to repeat this every year as a remembrance of how God brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery in Egypt. Excellent. Hey, we put it together. Number 8. Oh, well, yeah, you can write that down. Number 7, celebrated how God spared his people from the 10th plague in Egypt. All right, so we will pick it up in Second Chronicles chapter 30. We'll do our next little reading section, and then we'll have our break. Yeah.
oh, then 31
Here, 28 verses for 3 questions. Yeah. I will say, I mean, this course is relatively new, and it's my first time teaching this one and first time teaching the blue one.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, this one is fairly well put together. The blue one needed a little bit more work, but when they come up with another printing, it will be improved. All right.
Start somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Like it has color pictures, it has a timeline and a little bit of explanation. That's fantastic. All right. Any questions from chapter 29? And they have this line of animals and they're slaughtering them all and burning them all up to rededicate the temple. All right. So Second Chronicles chapter 30. Are we ready? It reads like this. Hezekiah sent messengers to all Israel and Judah. He also wrote letters inviting Ephraim and Manasseh to come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover for the Lord, the God of Israel. So he sends letters out to everybody who is still left in the land, in the entire land of Canaan. Verse 2, the king, his officials, and the whole assembly in Jerusalem had made plans to celebrate the Passover in the second month. They were not able to celebrate it at its proper time because the priests had not consecrated themselves in sufficient number, and the people had not assembled in Jerusalem. The plan seemed right in the eyes of the king and in the eyes of the whole assembly. So they decided to issue a proclamation throughout Israel from Beersheba to Dan to observe the Passover for the Lord, the God of Israel, at Jerusalem, because they had not been celebrating it with large numbers of people as had been commanded. So Beersheba is way at the bottom. I don't even know if it's on the map that we looked at today. No. If you look where the E in Edom or the M in Kingdom, Beersheba is right down there, or perhaps a little bit further south. And then Dan is way up in the north, and that river that comes down from the mountains and goes to the Sea of Galilee. So he sent messengers throughout the entire land of Israel, from Beersheba to Dan. There we are. Picking up in chapter 30, verse 6. Runners were sent out with letters from the hand of the king and from his officials to all Israel and Judah. Because of the command of the king, they made the following announcement. People of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and he will return to the remnant of you who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. You must not be like your fathers or like your brothers who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their fathers. That is why he gave them up to desolation, as you see. Now you must not be stiff-necked like your fathers. Give your hand to the Lord. Come to his sanctuary, which he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. For if you return to the Lord, your brothers and your children will be shown compassion in the presence of their captors, and be permitted to return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. He will not turn his face away from you if you return to him. The runners went from city to city throughout the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and even as far as Zebulun. But people laughed at them and ridiculed them. Nevertheless, some men from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. But in Judah, the hand of God was present to give them one heart to follow the command of the king and the command of the officials in agreement with the word of the Lord. Many people gathered in Jerusalem to keep the festival of unleavened bread in the second month, a very great assembly. They quickly removed the altars from Jerusalem. They took away all the altars for burning incense and threw them into the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is actually on your map where to the right of the Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea is that little blue blob at the bottom. And then you see that note for the brook Cherith or Cherith. It's basically right through there. So it actually connects up to there. Sorry. But that's the garbage dump for the city of Jerusalem. So they take it all out there and they dump it all in the garbage dump and maybe burn it. Maybe they don't. Verse 15, they slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the second month. The priests and the Levites had been put to shame, so they consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings into the house of the Lord. They took up their positions as described in the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests splashed the blood, which was given to them by the Levites, against the altar. Because many of the assembly had not consecrated themselves, the Levites carried out the slaughtering of the Passover lambs for everyone who was not ceremonially clean, to make them holy for the Lord. A large number of the people, many of whom were from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, that is from the north, a large number of people had not purified themselves, but they ate the Passover anyway, in a manner not keeping with what is written. So Hezekiah prayed for them. May the good Lord pardon everyone all around, that is, everyone who seeks God the Lord, the God of his fathers, with all his heart, even though he does not have the ceremonial purity required by the holy place. The Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The people of Israel who were present in Jerusalem observed the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days with great rejoicing. The Levites and the priests praised the Lord day by day with loud instruments for the Lord. Hezekiah encouraged the hearts of all the Levites, who displayed wonderful skills in service of the Lord. They ate the food of the festival for the appointed 7 days, presenting fellowship sacrifices and giving thanks to the Lord, the God of their fathers. The entire assembly agreed to celebrate for another 7 days. They gladly did it for another 7 days because Hezekiah, king of Judah, provided 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep for the assembly, and the officials contributed 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep for the assembly. So if you count that up, 2,000 cattle and 17,000 sheep. Pretty awesome. That's a big party. The priests consecrated themselves in great number. The whole assembly of Judah rejoiced together with the priests, the Levites, the entire assembly from Israel, the aliens who resided in the land of Israel, and the people who lived in Judah. There was great joy in Jerusalem, because since the time of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. Then the Levitical priests arose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard. Their prayer ascended to God's holy dwelling in heaven. And then verse 1. When all this was finished, all the Israelites who were present went out to the cities of Judah. They broke the sacred memorial pillars into pieces, chopped down the Asherah poles, and smashed the high places and the altars throughout Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh until the task was finished. Then all the people of Israel returned to their cities, each of them to his own property. All right, any questions? All right, number 8. As he restored, what is that up there? As he restored the celebration of the Passover, Hezekiah didn't call only the people from the southern kingdom of Judah to worship. Whom else did he call? Looking especially at chapter 30, verse 6. Yeah, all of Israel. So he called all the people of Israel who might have believed in the true God. All right, number 9. How long had it been since the Passover was celebrated properly like this? Looking especially at chapter 30, verse 26. Gretchen. Yeah, since the days of Solomon, which was nearly 300 years. I mean, you definitely get the impression that individual households had been doing this on a much smaller scale, because there were some who came back from the northern kingdom area. And when you're reading through that, you kind of hear about that, just a little bit about these people who had otherwise been celebrating privately. But this is like the entire city of Jerusalem. And it's such a big deal that they're like, all right, we're gonna do this for 2 weeks instead of 1. And number 10. After the Passover celebration was over, what did the people of Judah do at home and abroad? So within the nation of Judah and also outside the borders of the nation of Judah, what did they do? All right. So all throughout the land of Palestine, there's pillars and memorial stones and maybe some asteroids or meteorites, as well as carvings to all these false gods. The Canaanite people basically made up a god for anything in life. And if they made up one, then they probably made up two. To cover all their bases. And after this entire huge Passover celebration finished, they all went back to their homes or worked their way up north and started tearing everything down. So this is the last little bit of history before the southern kingdom is carried off into captivity, which is just about where our study is going to end for the year. We're actually going to end with Daniel in the lion's den. But between that, we basically read the entire book of Jeremiah. Just kidding. It's not quite all of it. All right. 2 Kings 22. Follow along and we'll read a little bit. Reads like this. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. Well, what? Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adaiah from Bozkath. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in all the ways of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right or to the left. In King Josiah's 18th year, the king sent the secretary Shaphan, son of Azaliah, son of Meshullam, to the house of the Lord, saying, "Go up to Hilkiah the high priest and have him weigh out the entire amount of silver which has been brought to the house of the Lord, which the gatekeepers have received from the people. It is to be given to those who are appointed to supervise the work on the house of the Lord. They are to give it to those who are working in the house of the Lord to repair the damage to the temple." And so this is roughly 85 years after the part that we just read with Hezekiah, and things have fallen apart again. So verse 6, give it to the craftsmen, builders, and stonemasons so they can buy wood and quarried stone to repair the damage. But no accounting is to be demanded for the silver which is given to them, because they are acting honestly. Then yeah. That the money that was there received at the temple was received as an offering, and there may have been another temple tax on top of that. And then the masons and people are just supposed to use the money for all their expenses, and don't worry about it, just get it done, kind of thing. So verse 8, then Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, "I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord." Hilkiah gave the scroll to Shaphan, and he read it. Then Shaphan the secretary went to the king and reported, "Your servants have paid out the silver which was found in the temple, and they have given it to those who are appointed to supervise the work on the Lord's house." Shaphan the secretary told the king, "Hilkiah the priest has given me a scroll." Then Shaphan read it in the presence of the king. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes. Then the king commanded Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, Akbor, son of Micaiah, Shaphan the secretary, and Asaiah, the servant of the king. Verse 13, go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all of Judah concerning the words of this book which has been found. For the Lord's wrath which is burning against us is great, because our fathers did not listen to the words of this book and do everything which was recorded for us. Then Hilkiah the priest with Ahikam, Akbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went and spoke to Huldah the prophetess, the wife of Shallum, who is the son of Tikvah, who is the son of Harhas, the keeper of the vestments. She was living in Jerusalem in the 2nd district. Verse 15, she gave them this message. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Tell the man who sent you to me that this is what the Lord says. Look, I am bringing disaster on this place and on its inhabitants, everything written in the book which they read before the king of Judah, because they have forsaken me and have burned incense and offerings to other gods, so that they provoked me to anger with all the works of their hands. My anger will be poured out on this place, it will not be quenched. This is what you are to say to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of the Lord. The Lord, the God of Israel, has spoken the words which you have heard. But because your heart was repentant, and you humbled yourself before the Lord, when you heard his words against this place and its inhabitants, that it would be desolate and cursed, and you have torn your clothes and have wept before me, even I have heard you, says the Lord. Therefore, be aware of this. I will gather you to your fathers, you will be gathered to your grave in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I will bring upon this place and its inhabitants. They brought the message back to the king. We'll pause there because then looking at number 11, we're supposed to go back to 2 Kings 21, verses 2 through 7. And this is basically why God says, time is up. I'm going to destroy the nation of Israel, or the nation of Judah, and I'm going to totally obliterate the city of Jerusalem. So 2 Kings 21, actually, I'll pick it up there in verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the disgusting practices of the nations which the Lord had driven out before the people of Israel. He rebuilt the high places which his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He erected altars to Baal and made an Asherah pole, just as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. He bowed down to the whole army of the heavens, that is, the sun, moon, and stars, and he served them. He built altars in the house of the Lord, about which the Lord had said, "In Jerusalem I will put my name." He built altars to all the army of the heavens in the 2 courtyards of the house of the Lord. He made his sons pass through the fire. He practiced fortune telling and sought omens and dealt with mediums and spiritists. He greatly increased the evil he did in the eyes of the Lord and provoked him to anger. He put an image of Asherah, which he had made, into the house about which the Lord had said to David and to his son Solomon, "In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel, I'll put my name forever." And if you scroll down to verse 16, page down to verse 16, verse 16, Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end. This was in addition to the sin which he caused Judah to commit, so that they did what is evil in the eyes of the Lord. Oh boy. So Manasseh is one of the worst, not the absolute worst, but his dad basically restored the proper worship of the one true God. They destroyed all the idols in the land. His dad Hezekiah dies, and Manasseh's like, all right, we're going to set this all back up again. So number 11. What did Hezekiah's son Manasseh do when he was king of Judah? Is that Kaylin? Did I see you raise your hand? I wasn't looking away. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Oh. All right. I was waiting. All right. We'll start with Keita. Excellent. Yeah. He worshiped the false gods as thoroughly as he could. As thoroughly as he could. He left no god unworshipped. He left no stone unvenerated. He rebuilt the places of false worship, built altars to false god in God's temple. He carved an idol himself and set it up inside the temple of God. Like if there's ever a time when God should have dropped some lightning down from heaven, that would have been it. And then killed innocent people. When he says that, that's both in regard to the worship of the idolatry that's going on, as well as he's the chief judge in the land, and he is the one who decides what punishment should be for crime. And so Manasseh is just a bad dude all around. Yeah, everybody turning around. Well, there was one time I had to preach up in Tecumseh, and I was running a little late. so I came in and I parked and I run and get my robe, and Roger Klein is like, "What's the hurry? Where's the fire?" I'm like, "I don't know. Time to go." All right, number 12. What did Josiah begin to do in the 18th year of his reign? Looking at chapter 22, verses 3 through 7. Kaylin. Yeah. And so he took out all his silver, and then he's like, well, let's use all the silver that we've collected there and fix up the temple the way that it should be. Excellent. And so by that time, Josiah had been king for 10 years. Yeah. Yeah. And so it is most likely that there was a co-regent until he turned 18. That isn't mentioned here in Second Kings. It might be in Chronicles or another. Yes.
Why do they have kings at that?
Why do they have kings at that young of an age? That's a good question. Because the kingship or whoever is the king in charge passes from parent to child. And so if I don't know if Manasseh was his exact, if there's somebody else between Manasseh and Josiah, I didn't look that up. But apparently whoever was king at the time passed away when Josiah was only 8 years old. And so they would have somebody usually serve as what we call a co-regent, which is somebody to basically be king until the little child is old enough to be king in the land at like age 18, which would line up with Josiah beginning this extensive repair work.
King Tut was
Somewhat.
really young when he was 52.
Yeah, King Tut would be another example. Yeah, I don't know if he was 8 or 10 or 12 or 15, somewhere in there. But yeah, that was a family line kind of a thing. Yeah, if only we had a device nearby. Number 13, as they were doing their work, what long lost item did they find? Chapter 22, verse 8. Kaylin. All right, they found the book of the law. This is great. And so most specifically, probably talking about the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Yeah. On a big long scroll or multiple
Around the
smaller
age of
ones.
9 and reading those stuff around the age of 19.
There you go. King Tut has been long dead by this point. Number 14, why do you think Josiah tore his robes when he heard the book of the law being read? Looking especially at chapter 22, verse 13. Yeah. All right. And so when they're reading through the book of the law, they hear all that God promises if they follow him, and all that God threatens if they don't follow him. And Josiah's looking around and he's like, there's an idol in every street corner again. There are more idols here than Tim Hortons in Canada.
It's still Wilbur's,
Yeah, yeah. Although apparently they taste very different down here than up there.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay,
Or maybe that's just a Canadian thing.
yeah.
And he realized, like, wow, look at all that God had done, and look at how they had as a nation responded over the centuries. All right, number 15. What did God say was coming to the southern kingdom of Judah because of their faithlessness? Looking especially at verses 16, 17, and 18. Chapter 22, verses 16, 17, and 18. Keelan. Yeah. Like, big disaster. That's what we'll hear about next time when we hear about the destruction of Jerusalem. God says, it's a day of woe, where he's going to pour out all of his wrath and clean out the cup. So pretty serious. Number 16. Even though disaster was coming, what did God promise specifically to King Josiah? Yeah. All right. That it would not happen while Josiah was alive. God said it's going to be terrible, horrible, no good, really bad. One of the worst days in all of human history. Oh, and by the way, Josiah, you're not going to see it. Well, that's a blessing. Yeah. Number 17. Down here, just a couple minutes. King Josiah, this gets into chapter 23, which we didn't really read. But if you look at chapter 23, verse 3, King Josiah was not the only one moved by God's word. Who else pledged themselves to God's law? Chapter 23, verse 3. All right. So we're talking about all the people of Judah pledged themselves to God. All right, number 18. To glance over chapter 23, verses 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. What is at least one thing that Josiah did to try and redirect the people back to the one true God? What is one? Caleb. All right. Good. What else? Uh-huh. So basically, he again got rid of all the altars and everything that had been dedicated to false gods, and did everything that he could to demonstrate in action that these gods weren't able to even help themselves and weren't true gods. And that is going to be our last question for tonight. Because I mean, verse numbers 21, 22, and 23 kind of ask you something that you aren't really prepared to answer yet. So I'm just going to put up our homework. We have just a couple of weeks left. Next week, we'll learn about the destruction of Jerusalem. And then the week after that will be Daniel and the Lions Den.